Welcome to the Generic Tech Support YouTube channel. Because sometimes you need a place to hang out where other people just like you would never do this. Like and subscribe for more content. Hey guys, so in today's video I want to start a new playlist on our actual channel, and the playlist's name is HELPDESK. And the reason why I want to start this is because I do want to cover a bunch of stuff that I think a level 1 or a level 2 tech may find helpful in their day-to-day activities of troubleshooting Windows infrastructure. So in this particular configuration, what we're going to focus on is Windows 11 systems running the latest patches, because, I mean, quite frankly, if you're watching these videos, should be patched up to the latest version. And we may go through that as well on how to get those systems patched to the latest version as part of the series. But I'd also like to touch base on just basic troubleshooting things that I think would be helpful for a lot of you that are getting into IT or are in a level 1 technical role. And these are things that either A, have been brought to me by people that I work with or techs that I work with, or things that have been brought to me in the past that I think would be helpful for some of the techs to understand how this works. And we're going to just go over all of that information, all of those configurations. So this video will probably be a little longer than the other videos, at least from my ranting, just because I'm trying to get you guys familiarized with what this actual channel will be, and this will be video number 1 in our HELPDESK playlist. So let's jump into it. Okay, so this one came across today. Well, we'll call it today. Really, it was last week, but let's say today. A technician that I work with said that he could not find the domain controller on the network. Then he needed to change a password, but he wasn't sure what the server was that he had to connect to find and change the password. So on this particular video, what we're going to go over is how to use a desktop to find the domain controller. Now, since a lot of these companies that work in the tech field that do managed service provision or managed service provider type of technology things use applications such as like GoToMyPC or Splashtop, God forbid, TeamViewer. Some of them are using ConnectWise's control aspect. Some of them are using proprietary things like Ninja One or Ninja RMM services with remote access controls. Most of these configurations allow you to do something called like backstages or back-end control, where they'll allow you to interact with a terminal on the system but not get a full-blown GUI. So we're going to touch base on that as well and pretend we're remoting into the system where we would only have a command logic as well. And I'll be able to run you through how to find that domain controller in both looking through the GUI as well as looking just straight through your command line. Now, both of these kind of require that the configuration is done correctly, in that if the DNS is borked, you got problems with the configuration, then this becomes a little more difficult to do. However, let's just assume, again, we probably shouldn't assume anything because Lord knows the vast majority of managed service providers out there are god-awful. So we should not assume anything, but we're going to assume that the configuration is set up correctly. And we're going to also take a look as to how we can determine whether or not the configuration is not set up correctly. Okay, so let's start with the GUI. I think the GUI is probably the best place for us to initially start. And what we're going to do is we're going to right-click on the Start menu, and we're going to go specifically to System. Once we're in System in here, we should be able to see the full device name. So this machine is franio1.generictechsupport.local. So that is our domain, generictechsupport.local. But that is the full domain. What if we want to access a domain controller? Okay, so we know that we need generictechsupport.local, right? So the best way for us to do this is to open up a command prompt. So we're going to right-click on Start, and we're going to go to Run. We're going to type in CMD. And then we're going to hit Enter on the keyboard, or you can click OK. Okay, so we have our command prompt open, right? Now what we have to do is we have to look up generictechsupport.local, right? So we know that that's our domain, but we don't know where the domain controller is. So the best way for us to do this is to NSLOOKUP, right? So if we just do NSLOOKUP generictechsupport.local, and we're going to see generictechsupport.local is 192.168.252.245. So now we can tell that that's the IP address of one of the domain controllers. So at this point, if we wanted to, we could remote desktop into that IP if it allowed it. if we're using like a third-party RMM tool, like again, like I don't know, Splashtop. If we're using Ninja One, if we're using Synchro, if we're using any of those things, what we could do there is we could actually search in those RMM tools and specifically search for the client name as well as the IP address, and that'll show us what system is the domain controller. Or we could go another step here and we can look up to see what that IP address is. Now, because the way the IP addresses work, you got to understand that we have in the DNS, we'll have an IP address that is the domain, but that IP address is also a domain controller. So when we do an NS lookup on the reverse lookup zone, we should get the name of the domain controller. Again, assuming the reverse lookup zone is correctly configured. If it's not correctly configured, this may not work for everybody, which is why it's so important to make sure your DNS is correctly configured. So what we're going to do is we're going to look up that IP address and see if this particular setup is correctly configured. So I'll just do an NS lookup 192.168.252.245, which is the address that comes back as being Generictechsupport.local. So let's hit the enter key and see what comes back. So there it is. It's TGO or TechGuy1 DC01.Generictechsupport.local. That's the name of the domain controller. So therefore, we've now discovered where our domain controller is without having access to the domain controller. We didn't know what it was before. We knew nothing, right? So we connected to the system. We found out that our domain was called Generictechsupport.local. We did an NS lookup for Generictechsupport.local and found an IP address. It could be any of the domain controller's IP addresses. They may all come back. Chances are, if you had more than one, you'd have Generictechsupport.local up here, which is the address that the system used to look it up. And then we'd have multiple addresses listed down here for all the other domain controllers. At which point you could do an NS lookup for the IP address of any of those domain controllers, and it will give you the fully qualified domain name of the domain and the domain controller to allow you to remote access it to do whatever you need to do, whether it's change a name or update a password or anything else. So if you don't have access to the GUI, right, and you're doing this through the command line in the back end where you have remote access but only through like terminal, whether it's PowerShell or command CMD, I would choose CMD, and I'm going to show you how to do that without any of this stuff open. So we're just going to use command line. We'll be able to pull back the same information. I'm going to show you how. Okay, so we are remote connected, or we're going to pretend we're remote connected to the system through command line only. We don't have access to the GUI. We can't do anything with the GUI. We can only do things through CMD. So how do we get the domain information? I'll show you that. So what we're going to do is we're going to run one command. It's systeminfo, one word. And then we're going to hit enter on the keyboard. Now, once we do that, you could already see, right? We don't have to do much of anything else. We could see our logon server is TechGuy1 DC01. So we know that that's the domain controller. And we could see the domain as listed as Generictechsupport.local. Now the thing is when you go through the back end of some of those systems through an RMM tool, generally speaking, you're not going to see this. And the reason why is because you're using the system account and not an actual local logon to access the system. But you will see this. And since you now see that, that means that you could use that information to do your NS lookup just like we did before, right? So we could go down here and we could do NS lookup. Generictechsupport.local, and then we hit enter. And there we go. When we do it, now it'll auto-populate it because it knows that we've already done this. It adds it to the ARP table. However, if it doesn't, and we'd still just see the generic tech support, we could do an NS lookup. And use the IP address, the 192.168.252.245, and hit enter. And there we go. Now we'll get the name of the actual server or the fully qualified domain name of the server that is the domain controller. Okay guys, so that just sums up how it is that we can troubleshoot and find the domain controller. Leave me a comment down below if there's anything you need help with. I can throw a video together for you. Thanks for watching.